gonna take out of that treatment plant with other water into the river. So essentially, you're not gonna do it, right, if you're already taking the water somewhere. And that was one run by our local representative, Snyder. And it was a Save the Great Salt Lake bill, because any reuse water that goes in the river now ends up in the Great Salt Lake. If you're in Salt Lake, Davis, Weber counties, ours ends up in Bear River Canal Company's water right. And so for Cache County, that tied with the state engineer's push to close the basin to any new water right appropriation limits Cache County's growth. I mean, we're gonna have to grow significantly different if we have no new water rights, which could mean no Bear River development, 60,000 acre feet, and we can't use the water rights we already have to their full depletion with the reuse project. It means the only water we have is what we're using today, and that has to meet our needs 50 and 100 years from now. It's gonna take huge changes in the way we develop. I mean, lawns are gonna get teeny. We've got to really change significantly if those two things stay in effect. Either could be changed, right? The next state engineer could say, no, we did a study, there's still groundwater, we can appropriate new water rights. This water reuse bill could get overturned in the future if we realize there's other ways to get water to the Great Salt Lake. But right now, the Great Salt Lake is gonna drive water policy in that basin.
Have we come up with any, you and I and Mr. Parker and Mr. Erickson were at that meeting with the Division of Water
Right.
Rights. And there was a chance or a time to send a response to them and written, where or what should we do?
Well, that's partly why I wanted this meeting to start that discussion, to see, I mean, yeah, I think the county council needs to draft a response. I think from the water district's point of view, we think at a minimum, they need to do a study to see what water is really there. Because in '99, the state engineer deemed that there was 25,000 acre feet of groundwater available for Cache County. Only about 7,000 of that has been filed on, and a smaller portion of that has actually been developed. So we're only using 4,000 or 5,000 acre feet of that 25,000 acre feet. So our stance is, well, let's do a study. Is there really 20,000 acre feet available still? We should at least be able to develop that much before we're shut off. Not just shut it off because we want it to flow out the springs and the artesian wells and go to Great Salt.
Well, I was mad that the Division of Water Rights went up and above the moratorium of government costs.
Yeah.
Right.
I thought that was.
Well, I think it's there because we're really the only basin in the state that wasn't already closed, right? Us and Box Elder County and Rich. The Bear River Basin was really the only.
Based on the previous
Yeah,
study.
right, based on studies that we still had adequate water supply to continue to develop.
Right.
And so we think, because Box Elders, their study was done in 2017.
Yeah.
And so now that water just disappeared too, even though it's still there. And so,
So given that, we've got to have that in by a certain time.
yeah, I think,
Probably ought to set up another workshop where we draft that response.
yeah,
or
I think
have
the
something.
county council should definitely send in, you know, and maybe contact a few of the other cities to get people, you know, their opinions, but I think at a minimum, that bigger study to see what's really there before they change that
Right,
policy.
because
needs to
they
happen.
said when that meeting was going on, 90 days or something was that there, so we've already gone
So that-
past 30 days. Or
Yeah, that
so.
was, February 18th or something, so yeah, we're
So Nate, we're a closed basin now?
no,
Okay.
today we're not.
Okay.
There-
Shortly.
Today, you could still do a single family, could file for an application to get a water right if they were on a parcel of ground in the county that hasn't been split since '99. That parcel would be able to get one domestic use for that parcel. And cities could still apply, or, you know, bigger developments could apply for some of that 25,000 acre feet, if they could show that the need for it currently. So this policy, and this is where they wavered a little bit, because the policy change was to just take out that caveat for the single home use. And then, one of the people on the Zoom meeting asked, what about that 25,000 acre feet? And that kind of caught them off guard. I don't think they realized they needed to address that too, over here like they did in Box Elder County.
Help me understand, like, what's the difference between something that's been subdivided more recently than '99?
That was just when they did that original study, those were the only lots that were eligible to get essentially a free water right.
Okay.
And then even if they were just split, not in
I'm
a,
bringing it from somewhere
yep,
else.
if there was even a split, to split it between two landowners, then that parcel wouldn't be eligible for that.
Part of that 25,000 acre?
It would come out of that 25,000 acre feet, but at that rate, I mean, cause you know, you only need 0.45 acre feet, so that's gonna last us, if that's the only right we were using it for, it'd last a long, long time. So yeah, it will put pressure on existing water rights, essentially ag, for any future development, if both of those go into play. Cause that'll be, you know, any development that happens above canal companies, they're gonna have to buy a water right and move it to a well up there and do that.
If there was a determination, you know, or a study that said, you know, we still have 20,000 acre feet or whatever, that's not just the county's water, right? I mean, cities could go after that water,
Yeah.
or anybody else in the
Yeah,
basin.
some of the existing, I think Nibley has gotten some of the existing, that 5,000 that's been filed on, there's been some little bit bigger ones on that. Yeah. So I think in the meaning of time, that's my update with water, unless there's more questions for me.
Can I just say, I was at a Chamber of Commerce Legislative Affairs Committee that Nathan was at, and there were water experts talking about that we just have way too much in our ag. And you weren't even at the meeting the next week where that same individual said, we have to follow the farmland. I mean, he was.
Yeah,
to
they
fill
didn't
the
know
solid-
what they were talking
I
about.
was so glad you were there to speak up, because the general consensus is following that expertise, and
Well,
so
and
we need to keep
it-
speaking
Well, that
up.
happened in Park City last year.
And the problem is,
Suing the
if you
farmer
get
for
rid of
water.
all ag
Yeah.
and you go to all development and residential, your water supply, there's no flexibility in it, right? Agriculture, there's a lot of flexibility.
Yes.
Because on a dry year, you can dry it up for a year if you have to keep people alive. But if everybody's using the water and there's no flexibility in it, we gotta build a dam, and we don't have that. So we either gotta get some dams built so we have flexibility, or we gotta keep ag in the county.
We need to keep
Or-
that message alive, because there's a lot
We
of
really
other
need to do both,
voices
but that's
saying.
another
and they're-
discussion, I think.
Yeah, and these are water experts, right?
I don't know where she got that title, but I wouldn't give her that title.
Self-derived.
He gave himself that title.
Yeah, there's,
Anyway, enough said. I was really grateful that Nathan was there to speak up.
Let's go right to the next two issues up there, which are not controversial at all.
Not on the planning commission.
we came to consensus.
Slammed up for us.
Okay, yeah, let's go ahead and turn it over to the
Bet.
Development Services.
In interest of time, I'm going to do my best to make our comments as short as possible to allow for as much discussion as possible. And so hold on with me, because I'm about ready to take this motorcycle and just throw it right into fourth gear and let's go. We, in the Department of Development Services, several issues have come up just in the last year where we definitely need improvements or increases or clarification with our code. And I'm going to cover the two at the end first, just to mention them, and we're going to have to meet another time on that. So with sensitive areas, we really have two different issues with that we need some help on. One is whether sensitive lands, sensitive areas, are used in the calculation of density for whether someone can build or not. And so that is something that we simply need to look at. And so we do not have time, I don't think, we have some slides on it, but I'm just suggesting that that's one thing that we might have to come back to at another time. Another one is, quite frankly, it's just it's probably one of the most simple ones that we need to help the council and the planning commission with, and that is whether a private landowner can build a road on a steep slope. And currently, our current county code prohibits that, and between Matt and us and all the discussions, we feel that it would be possible to allow that, but then it kind of then falls on the engineering to make sure that that the developer, the landowner, would build that to code, would build it to the right standards. And so I apologize that really is probably all we're going to have time to talk about, just to introduce it and let you know that we will come back to you. And those code changes, oftentimes we'll go to the planning commission first, and then we'll say, what do you think? And then they'll recommend it to the council. The council will have time in the future to look at those. And so now going back, with the accessory dwelling units and moderate income housing plan, I just want to remind the council that, our general plan per the state now includes not just a general plan, which is big enough and complicated enough and has plenty of opportunities for us to develop policy in it, but it also must include moderate income housing plan. It also, and we get to do yearly updates on that. It also includes a water component now that we will be required to develop and update the state with on a regular basis. It also includes a resource management plan that you may or may not be familiar with, and that's one that has been a requirement, and we are working, and we work with Bragg, and we help update that.
We've been doing that one for years.
Yeah, and so it's not really quote unquote just a general plan anymore, but it's a general plan with several components. Additionally though, the state has kind of developed further teeth in kind of requiring counties and other municipalities to create these plans and to update the state with certain requirements in these plans. And I think it was February where the council, Tim came to you and said, listen, we got this moderate income housing plan approved by the council last November, but the state said, well, you didn't include your strategies. You have to pick strategies and propose them to us and tell us what strategies you're going to look at. Now there's a list, Tim's going to show us a list, and the council picked the 3 strategies that Tim suggested, and the first one is, I'm going to go ahead, and that's going to just drive Tim nuts. But the first one, and we did pick E, F, and G, okay? And strategy E, and I'm just going to overview these and then turn it over to Tim if he has any other comments, and then we can spend the last kind of 20 minutes discussing that. E is create or allow for and reduce regulations related to internal or detached accessory dwelling units in residential zones. When we submitted this to the state, we also were asked to include, well, give us a basic plan of how you're going to achieve these strategies. And I'm here before you to tell you that this moderate income housing plan, as far as the Department of Development Services is concerned, is we're looking at an August of this year deadline to give them our update. Now an update would basically be, here are our 3 priorities, and this is what we've attempted to, how our original plan was to attempt those, or look at those, and what we've done. So we give them a yearly update. But we're sitting here in April, yeah, it's a report. We're sitting here in April, and being the best bureaucrat I can be, I'm thinking we better have our job done by the last council meeting in probably July to make sure that we can wrap up and do any final edits and throw that back to the state. It's an administrative report. We definitely want the council and the planning commission to be involved in that. No problem there. But we're going to want, my suggestion on E, knowing that we have that August deadline, just to give them an update, my suggestion on E is that we actually, a major goal in my mind would be to have the council look at and really just update our code to match what the state has required of what they required in the last session. They passed some pretty significant legislation that is giving us some very clear outlines. In just less than a minute, I'm going to invite Taylor to come up, and he's offered to go over really what are those requirements or how has it changed. And my goal, my suggestion to the Council and Planning Commission is let's just work on getting our code updated to get it in line with state code. That enough, in my mind, would be enough to give them a report and say, hey, we've worked on it in 2023, and then we can go on and move on to the more, quite frankly, the more sensitive, the more bigger policy discussions that we might want to have. Before I invite Taylor up, I'm just going to show you F and G, and then basically tell you that on both of these, we submitted our plan to quote unquote work with the municipalities. That really is the foundation of our plan on F and G. So I'm going to read F and G, and then Taylor will come up after, because that'll give us enough time to hand out stuff. Strategy F on the moderate income housing plan. Zone or rezone for higher density or moderate income residential development in commercial or mixed use zones, commercial centers, or employment centers. And those two paragraphs, we're happy to share these slides with you. But those two paragraphs basically say, we've been helping our municipalities in the past achieve this. We plan on continuing to work with them and help them to find places to put increased density projects. G is similar, but not exactly the same. It deals more with transit. Amend land use regulations to allow for higher density or new moderate income residential development in commercial or mixed use zones near major transit investment corridors. So again, our strategies that we put in there were to work with our municipalities to help achieve better planning around transit hubs and to increase density. But really, we're focusing on helping the municipalities. And I should say, this is what they want to see in our report in August. What have we done? What if any, did we have that were land use regulations and decisions? What barriers are you facing? Talk to us about how you addressed accessory dwelling units. What do you feel the market response has been? I'm not sure we're going to have a whole lot to report on that. And then recommendations. And so I just that's a really quick overview of, in my mind, the reason why we're talking about ADUs today is really, it's connected to the fact that we now have a moderate income housing portion of our general plan that we get to do a yearly report or update on. So Taylor, if you could take a few minutes and tell us what is or isn't allowed, and then Tim can offer his final thoughts on what I may have missed.
Thank you. I actually just this past weekend went to a conference, Utah Land Use Institute conference down in St. George, where attorneys and planners gathered to talk about the new updates in the law. And one of the topics that we spoke about were accessory dwelling units. So one of the issues that the state legislature has is they've been pushing for these types of changes, and municipalities and counties have not been responsive. And they've not been making their own changes. They haven't been, innovating on their own. So the legislatures had to push down from the top, forcing some of these regulations to go away. So in 2021, some new governing statutes were adopted to create some statutory limitations to prohibit some regulations of internal accessory dwelling units. So if you go to page 2, part D, limitations on regulation of internal accessory dwelling units. One internal ADU, a primary detached dwelling, generally must be a permitted use in any area zoned primarily for residential use. It may not be restricted except as provided below. So no more blanket restrictions on internal ADUs. That's the takeaway from that. We have to allow internal ADUs. And there are some limitations on that, so we can jump into that. But we can no longer regulate the size of an internal ADU in relation to the primary dwelling. So it used to be that we could, and we did have, regulations here in the county that it couldn't be above a certain square footage or it couldn't be above a certain percentage of the property. But those internal rules are not allowed anymore. You cannot impose a requirement governing the total lot size, except requiring a minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet. And you can no longer impose a requirement for street frontage. So what this does is this signals the legislature intent that this is a solution that they see to Utah's housing crisis. They want higher density, but they also recognize that a lot of the housing stock in this state is already single-family dwellings. And so that's a solution they see is that we can convert a lot of our single detached residences into multi-family residences by internal accessory dwelling units. So there are some restrictions that a county may do. That list is on page 3. So a lot of these are cosmetic though. So it's a challenge to put some of these in place in any sort of way that would prevent ADUs, if that was your goal. So prohibiting installation of a separate utility meter, requiring that the ADU be designed so that the appearance of the primary dwelling doesn't change, these are all allowed. Requiring additional on-site parking, requiring replacement of any parking spaces lost, requiring the owner to obtain a license, prohibit renting the ADU for fewer than 30 consecutive days, prohibiting rental if the primary dwelling unit is not occupied as the owner's primary residence. So these are some of the restrictions we can do. I also gave you a handout of short-term rentals, just for your reference. Some counties in our state are struggling with short-term rentals. Summit County, Washington County, Grand County. Some of the more touristy areas have large portions of their housing stock taken up by short-term rentals, Airbnbs, VRBOs, and so forth. But generally, statewide, STRs are 1.6% of the total housing stock. So in a lot of different places, short-term rentals are not a huge concern as taking up too much available housing stock. So these are questions that we have to keep in mind of, first off, do we want to regulate accessory dwelling units in the unincorporated county at all? Do we want it only to be internal or do we want external? If you think, a little mother-in-law detached apartment on a 10-acre lot in the unincorporated county, would that be a huge deal to most people? Maybe, maybe not. So these are, how much regulation you want to do is always going to be inverse of how much extra housing stock we're going to get out of it. Because if we signal our intention that we don't want to regulate this, we want people to, have their kids rent from them in a ADU while we go to Utah State or something, I think people would respond. I think we would see I think we would see an increase in housing stock for people converting their own properties. So this handout is a great reference for what is allowed and what's not allowed. But like I said, the legislature has already signaled their intent that they're not pleased at the rate that the counties and municipalities are working on this issue, which is what caused them to do some top-down regulation and push it down on us. So I think the better and more effective we are at this level, we'll be able to show the state legislature that we are being successful, that we are pushing forward on this issue, and avoid more top-down regulation. So if you have any questions,
On page 3,
yes.
Which one?
2, 1, double line and 1, it says a municipality.
Accessory.
Well, number 1,
Which of the pamphlets are you in?
I'm in the ADU, page 3. In zoning districts, I have a question of our zoning in the county, A10, RU5, RU2. It says here, in zoning districts that are not primarily for residential use. In other words, zones where the primary use is commercial, industrial, or agricultural. So does A10 meet that, and you can restrict ADUs in A10 because primary use is
That's correct.
agriculture?
You could in fact do that because agriculture is the primary use.
Right,
in the
so that's what I'm saying is who is going to help us in our zoning regulation determine primary use of our zones?
Well, the primary use of each zone is spelled out in our county code, and agriculture is the primary use.
So there is a part that we can exclude in A10 if so desired.
If you decide that that's the policy you want to take, I think that's possible. If you wanted to completely restrict ADUs in the A10 zone, I think that's possible.
I mean,
So the unincorporated county is in kind of a unique situation as compared to municipalities where they have most of their zones are exclusively for residential properties. So in the unincorporated county, we do have a lot of acreage that's A10.
as we discussed that, because we've heard from Chief Hammer, who has some issues on this and roads as well as engineering, because our road manual says more than 5 houses on a road, private, you gotta change it. Well, does that adapt to if there's an ADU there or whatever else? So all of these are issues that we need to delve deeper into and see where we're at there.
Given that an A10 zoning provides for a lot, a residential lot. You know, it doesn't seem quite as clear cut to me.
Right, so, I mean, can you restrict it in the A10 zone, because it is not the primary use? Yes. Does it make sense to do so? That's another question.
Taylor, would it be possible for the council to take action to clarify that? Or would that be something they could do to say it's our policy that, you know, we do want to or don't want to restrict in A10? Is that something they could work on?
Yes, I mean, you can put that in your ordinance, you can say ADUs are not allowed in the A10 zone, it's not the primary use. That's an option you could take.
Residential is not the primary.
Correct, residential is not the primary use, that's an action you could take.
Or you could go the other way, I guess my
Right.
point is, that's something you guys can
Yes, that is.
discuss and figure out.
That's something to discuss and come to that as the legislative body, you can develop that policy and say, we want our A10 zone, we want to preserve as much land as we can, and the lots that are already residential, we want it to be more densely populated. Or, so.
So what would be the next step for us then, Taylor? Like, would it come from, like, verbiage from the planning commission then that we either accept or add to or delete? Or do we start the process to prepare something like that, a
Something
code?
useful is, I think, would probably come to a consensus, I think, of what you want your policy to be, and recommend to our planning staff that they draft some sample ordinances for you to vote on and work on. And they would submit that
Provide
to
some
planning
framework to
commission.
what we as a council would maybe be open to, so we're not just saying, hey, give us something.
Correct.
Yeah.
You know, there's gonna be a domino effect on everything in the ordinance almost. When you increase or decrease, like you say, the roads. Right now, if you've got 5, basically that'll be 10. And we're saying that the roads can't handle that. And so your roads are gonna be the limiting factors to really what you can and can't do on these, right?
So
So then we gotta change
that's
that.
The ones that are on a
So-
private road,
right.
if they were on a main road, it wouldn't change
So
anything.
that's an open question.
So they could do
if
it,
you
it would
have-
change it.
If you have a home that has no ADU, and 10 kids, and 5 of them are teenagers, and they all have cars, how is that any different? You know, this, I'm just playing devil's advocate for you, Mr. Harrison, but how is that different than someone with an ADU that an old woman lives at, one person, and the rest of the house is occupied by 2 people? That's fewer people, with fewer cars, fewer trips. So
Does the ADU specify how many you can have in there?
that would-
One old
That
woman?
would be up to us.
It
Or
does,
can
it
you have-
doesn't, it
can you have
doesn't if
another
it's
10
internal.
Teenagers, all have cars.
That's why
It
It
just
just never ends.
It doesn't make sense that that's how it's gonna play out, though.
Yeah.
I mean,
There
what
are
I'm,
the alternative
it'd be
routes.
nice to, you know, understand more of what the council's hearing, where you're coming from, because I sense planning commission is over here and the council may be over here on this particular issue. Because I know in conversations I've had with other planning commissioners or open discussion or whatever, you know, we're looking at this saying, hey, we can provide more housing stock without building any more roads, potentially without putting any more wells in the ground, you know, those sorts of things. We talk about housing affordability for young people. I have an elderly mother, you know, those kinds of things, yeah. And there's property rights as well.
And
So
I think, yeah,
those are some of the things that
Yeah.
I'm thinking about and that I've heard others, you know, mention as well. And Nolan, you touched on a few things that, you know, need to be considered for sure. I mean, yes, it potentially is going to increase traffic, but we're not taking on any more new roads in theory, you know, by
But
increasing a housing stock.
Well, but with any increase in housing stock, you are putting pressure on all other utilities. Might not add roads, but you're putting pressure on all other
you're
utilities.
gonna have to increase housing stock one way or another. It's whether it's,
Exactly.
yeah, the apartment complex down the street or,
Right, so,
Yeah,
but
we're
what
getting
I'm saying is,
increases.
we're not getting out
yeah, you
those
still have those.
impacts.
And
We're only talking
I'm
about
not a
maybe
legislator,
offsetting
so
a road.
my opinion's of limited value, but, you know, just.
Sometimes so is theirs.
From my private perspective, I would prefer having ADUs spread out over the county than have a couple of really, you know, dense rather spread my manure over an entire field than have a large pile of it, so. That's kind of my perspective.
In answer to Sandy's question about where we go next, I just want to offer that from the development services side, we're more than happy to do research on different options. Like the option about, I know Matt's worried about the load on the roads. Why don't we talk to some counties that have, I believe there are some counties in Utah that have allowed detached ADUs, and let's say, when did you do it? What did you notice? Did you have more load? Did you have more load than you needed or than you wanted? How did your budgets have to increase, right, to maintain more? How did you, and we just want to offer that we can do that. If you guys have requests for us to look into certain things, I hate to, I know Tim's wincing because we're down on staff, but that's what we do. We can look into things for you, we can provide data. If you tell us what to look at, we can look at it. It would help if it were, pretty straightforward. Look into this, and then we can look at it, share what we find. And then we'll let you do with it, what you will, with the data or with what we find. But we're happy to be a resource.
To me, I look at it and I say, it's a better solution than building more subdivisions all over the place. To me, that's more county resources going into new stuff. And there's a fractional less investment on the county's part for, I think, the ADU solution. We've got, what, 8,000 housing units in the county, in the unincorporated county, roughly? I mean, not all of them are gonna do ADUs, some fraction of that, but that potential housing stock could be hundreds or thousands of units or whatever. That's gonna last us quite a long time.
I can share what we've heard from Matt regarding roads, and obviously subject to more study and discussion, but generally it's private versus public road,
Yeah.
right? If it's a public road, it's already paved, the capacity's there, it's about trips per day. There should be ample capacity with public road access if ADUs are added. Private roads, if more than the equivalent of 5 single-family homes, currently the 6th home triggers the pavement of the private road, and then it goes up substantially from there. So there might just be a cost limitation to put ADUs onto private roads. So these are some of the decision points, just like, do I need to expand my septic system to accommodate 2 more bedrooms in an ADU, or increase the waterway? So I think it's about what are the impacts and how are those addressed, and we just barely started to talk about those, but there are solutions to each of these issues.
And the way we talked about it a little bit in our planning commission meeting is the detached ones, you can actually put more restrictions on than the attached ones. Because now with the legislation, you can't limit the size if it's attached. You can't limit any of that. You can't require an extra water right, because that falls under one water right. If you do detached, you can limit the size, so it could be a 2-bedroom, that's all you're gonna increase it. You can require another water right. So I think there's a lot more in our mind, at least mine looking at it, we could control it a lot more if they were detached than just, because the legislature already said, if it's attached, you can let them do it. Now, we could restrict it in the ag zone, so then it'd just be on the RU5s and RU2s. But where you can't restrict the size, you could have, 10-bedroom home split between 2 families. That's a lot of vehicle trips, whereas we know we can restrict that to a 2-bedroom apartment that they could have on the side. So it could limit it and give you a lot more control than I think we have if we do nothing. I think the legislature, if you do nothing, they'll just pass another bill that makes you do something.
If we do something, they'll just pass another bill.
They may, but if you somewhat go in the direction they seem to be pushing you anyways, it may be easier to work with.
So we have a number of code, maybe not suggestions, but needs to help the Development Services Office with our interpretations and with our administrative decisions. We will be bringing those to you. Those include things like, and I've mentioned it before, where we have folks that are coming to us now and saying, let us build our garage first, live in it. That way we can have money to build the home eventually. We've got some clarified code to really help us on that. As well, we just mentioned, if you go the route, maybe some clarification on the code on what is a family, because right now our code is like one family with the roads. Code clarification on the code there, because if once you add an ADU, internal or external, we may, wanna consider changes to code that help us track and actually account for those additional people that are in there. Taylor, I don't know if it was in there, but heck, I don't know if we can even track some of this a little bit better. I know when things come in and proposals come into our office, I know I've got my analysts sitting next to me that say, this looks a lot like an Airbnb that they're trying to build.
One of the recommendations from the property ombudsman is to make a system where it's allowed and they can apply for a license, because once they apply for a license, then we can track who's doing it.
A landlord license.
Right, so if you have a landlord license, then it's a lot easier to track where these ADUs are, and if they don't have it, then we have more leverage to force them back into compliance.
And it's tough from the administrative side. I have to tell my analysts, you're right, this really does look like a dwelling unit on top of a garage, but if they don't have a cooking facilities in there, we can't assume what we think they're gonna do with it. We have to analyze it and approve it or disapprove it based on the plans they've given us. You know, big gaping hole for where an oven might usually go in an American plan, but they didn't say, hey, cooking facilities oven there, and you're going, you know? And we are working hard. Our building guys go to these for the final inspections, and they're like, hey, there's an oven here.
It's just a really hot cabinet.
Yeah. And so they come back to us and we say, we can't approve this. This doesn't match the plans we got. You've clearly built what is called an accessory dwelling unit that is detached. It's in your detached garage, and that's not allowed. So we're working.
So then they
hard to
take the
enforce
oven
it.
out and you approve it and they get their permit and then they put the oven back in.
And you know, I think a
Make
lot of
the
us
way it
would
works so they
say,
can do it legally.
we know a lot of that's going
Yeah.
on out there.
Right, I was gonna say, I know multiple people that live in the county boundaries that have just built them. I mean, what is it, the economic factors, other factors, they're doing it. So, it doesn't mean it's not gonna happen if we don't have it in our code. I think we write code, so we create the incentive that they'll wanna do it legally.
Those tend to be detached or internal or both.
Both,
Detached, yeah.
both, yeah.
But if you have it in code, then you have something to
It's
enforce.
shed.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, we were really lucky to get Steve here. And for the most part right now, we get citizen referrals on code violations like this. And so that way, it doesn't look like we're just going after people kind of on our own. And those can be anonymous, and Steve keeps that anonymous. But we get those referrals almost every week. and
I'm
just
not
following up on it.
outing my friends.
We're not, I don't have a
We know where to
referral form
come.
for you to fill out here. in this
That's
meeting,
on
but-
record too now.
Expect one.
Yeah. So I would say in conclusion, we just really take what we do seriously, and we're excited for the many issues that are before us. You can expect to see suggestions going to the planning commission on code changes, on all of these things we've discussed, not only like that interesting ADU, egg before, you know, A before B, B before A, but also with, sensitive areas and density calculations, as well as private road issue. And anything else that you want from us, we can help. We can get to work and support the commission and the council. So we're excited to do that. Tim, any
Just
final
final
comments?
thought is our required moderate income housing plan does require minimum 3 strategies. If we provide 5 strategies, then we bump up to prioritize state funding. And there are more, what's the word? There are more penalties, pretty severe penalties if we do not comply with our plan. So I just thought, I think it's been previously asked, what other strategies could we choose from for those 3? And I just wanted to pass that around, let you each take one of those for your packet.
And it doesn't, it's for all counties, it doesn't matter what class you're in or whatever?
It's for counties, 5,000, unincorporated population, 5,000.
Is the Utah Land Institute a government agency or a private agency?
Utah Land Institute.
The
is-
Utah
Workforce Services.
I think they're a nonprofit education foundation.
They're not a government agency.
And they do a lot of hard work with Utah agencies.
Looks like a nonprofit funded by one government. So yes, it's a government.
You're busy.
I think it's more motivation for all these next things.
Why does it say May? That tells me it doesn't say shall.
Where I was seeing the maze, and I didn't read it all, where I was seeing the maze
What are we doing?
but there was no May.
If I owned 10 acres and I had 5 kids and I wanted to.
We'll allow them in these areas.
See, it's always been
As
our,
long as you don't subdivide it, right?
Like, what's to keep people from doing that and not subdividing it? And just-
Limit it to one.
try to do that, RU2, RU5.
Well-
Cities, if they're not, when they draw their boundaries.
To me, it's a
Try to stay
accessory
close
dwelling
to their-
unit or a detached dwelling unit, one per one house.
Always use roads.
Right, so,
Policy to,
Got it.
you know, to kind of control a lot of that. Now,
Regulation's still intact.
now all of a sudden.
you look around and you see some
There's so many limiting factors.
It costs so much to
milk
maintain.
barns have been converted into a
Money. Now all of a sudden we're saying that's a faulty way of looking at it.
So I just think if I was, I don't know, place for my mom, you know, if I have the property and I have the room, it'd be nice to have a little apartment too. Or a college kid that's coming.
Or a place for yourself when
Yeah.
your kids become families and need a place and you need a smaller place. You move out there and your kids get the bigger house. But I think with,
You know, I've been, you know, and I don't, I mean, that's just my.
I read that, I go,
Fascinated.
this is
Let's
not
not
right.
restrict it so much, because I just think it's a way to. Plans are coming out for
many
If I have,
tiny homes. Yeah.
They see it.
I don't have space,
Accessory dwelling unit.
move out on their own.
okay,
Yeah, or
but
even a quarter acre lot, because they're so small, it reduces the lawn you're watering, so the water use changes.
Anyway, hey, Micah, how much?
They have one more parking spot.
5 loaves, 2 fishes, what do you got in there?
value of that property up and you have.
It's a little interesting to see, but yeah, everyone's, there's strong opinions both ways, but
What's
I
that?
think the state has shown that if.
They're not.
You can have mine.
You can have